Le sommet international de l'éducation du futur réunit une soixantaine de conférenciers du monde entier. Des pionniers et des innovateurs issus du monde de l'éducation, bien évidemment, mais également des êtres inspirants, issus des chemins de sagesse ou des chemins d'apprentissage et de créativité dans différents domaines. Les arts, les sciences, l'économie, le lien avec la nature, le sport, etc. Des expériences et des chemins de vie qui sont un formidable enrichissement pour le monde de l'éducation. Le professionnalisme des traductions, en simultané, et l'incroyable richesse de toutes ces conférences offrent un horizon de point de vue vaste et varié, très complet, qui en font au final une véritable formation professionnelle pour les enseignants, les éducateurs et tous les professionnels de l'éducation, mais également une formation à la parentalité consciente et une formation individuelle à la vie consciente. Face à toute cette richesse et aux divers retours, nous avons décidé d'offrir toutes ces conférences à tous, partout dans le monde, en français et en anglais, quelquefois en allemand et en espagnol. Découvrez la vision d'acteurs audacieux et influents du changement, vers un monde éthique, solidaire, généreux et profondément respectueux de tous, des cultures, des peuples, des règnes et de la planète. Un incroyable panel de conférences, couvrant toutes les dimensions de l'éducation, pour un futur ayant du sens, une humanité épanouie et une terre qui respire. Une chose est sûre, votre vie, et à travers vous, celle des enfants, ne sera plus la même après avoir écouté toutes ces conférences. Pour avancer, nous avons besoin de vous, nous avons besoin de votre générosité solidaire. L'organisation du sommet et l'édition des conférences ont nécessité des milliers d'heures de travail et nécessitent encore beaucoup de temps et d'investissement. Nous faisons appel aux dons libres et spontanés pour compléter le financement du sommet et, si possible, continuer à l'enrichir de nouvelles conférences. Votre soutien est vraiment précieux et vital pour aller jusqu'au bout de cette aventure extraordinaire. Merci.
Register. So I'm very happy to welcome you, Sujith. It was very nice to speak with you.
Thank you.
1 month ago. I think I don't remember when we speak together, but I'm very happy to welcome Sujith. He is a very interesting man, and he has done a lot of things. He has spent a lot of years in India with sages, and he is working with abundance. He is helping a lot of enterprises, schools, and different things to increase in peace and in consciousness and in happiness and abundance and so on. And it's very nice. You will have a very nice time with him, I'm sure.
Now, thank you for the glowing introduction, Abel. Thank you. Just to make sure that I fully respect all the constraints here, how much time do we have?
The next one will come at 6.
All right. Okay. So we have a good hour at least.
Yes, at least more.
Indeed. And, I happen to be noticing in the Q&A a couple of great questions around the essence of kids being raised in the Q&A. So that itself was extremely inspirational for me. So it can be very distracting to move away from the topic that we agreed. So let me try my best to stay with what we agreed. And that is to focus on abundance or abundance manifestation as a characteristic of kids and as a manifestation. So Firstly, I want to thank you, Abel, for months and months of effort you did for the cause of education for the future. I've seen that, really, really up close. And I have so much admiration for the sacrifices you made over the last many months, the dream that you carried relentlessly. COVID have defeated lesser human beings, but you prevailed with your dream. And now we have this conference, and humanity is so much better off because of that persistence. And I know that you did not do this alone. There's been Satyana and so many other people together with you to make this happen. So my applause to everyone in the foreground and the background.
Thank you, Sujith.
Thank you. And you actually embody that spirit of abundance that children are. And as you said in your introduction, Abel, indeed, I grew up in India, and I've been since the age of 4. I'm aware that I've been in formal spiritual traditions. And in these traditions, children are paid very, very close attention to. And one of the fundamental things, it was at the age of 22 that I really actually first started to travel through the West. And, it's when you confront yourself with something that is foreign to you that you start noticing some of the subtler differences about you compared to others. And without any judgment, one of the things that I became very profoundly aware of around the education system, predominantly in the West, but also the mainstream, the modern education system in India, has been very fascinating. And I'll come to that in a moment. But the most important thing I want to start with is this simple understanding that we, each one of us, Abel, each one of us, we are born self-realized. Now, this might be a cause of confusion. This statement might be a cause of confusion for many people who follow me. Wait a minute. We are born self-realized. The truth that we know from the sages, from the masters, from the thought leaders is indeed we are born abundant. We are born completely self-realized. And the 3 qualities that we refer to of a self-realized individual are Sat, Chit, Ananda. These are the 3 qualities of anybody who is self-realized. What does that mean? Sat means I am the subjective experience of all of existence, the truth. Chit represents the ultimate unchanging reality or consciousness that we are. And Ananda refers to bliss. The bliss, which is not a transactional or a transient experience. The locus of that experience is within each individual. And we are born that way. We are born as Sat, Chit, Ananda. Now, fully aware of our existence, fully living the consciousness of this unchanging reality, and in bliss. Many modern scientific tests are increasingly establishing that. And one of the best fields today to follow in contemporary science is neuroscience. And neuroscience categorically establishes that indeed, when we are born, we are in a state of bliss. We are in expanded consciousness and with this understanding of the self as a subjective experience. That's how we are born, self-realized children. And in my spiritual tradition in India, we recognize that about children. We are born self-realized. And, we grow up with all kinds of experiences, and all these experiences keep growing, conditioning us, like layers and layers of an onion conditions us. Every single experience conditions us, and that conditioning starts to limit us. So here we are born fully abundant. And I remember seeing some Q&A questions around, play and constraints and imagination, etc. Yes, we are infinitely playful, abundantly imaginative, without any constraint, etc. That is abundance, true abundance. So forget about abundance in the context of money or materials. If I have abundance of happiness and good health, etc., you know what? Suddenly I notice the idea of money and materials or fame, etc., doesn't matter. Now, children are born in that abundance. And then, by virtue of each of our life experiences, what happens? A little by little, that abundance starts to shrink. The sense of abundance starts to shrink. And each life experience, positive or negative, mostly negative, but also some positive experiences, constrain us like layers of the onion built around that spaciousness, that infiniteness inside the onion. And then what happens with many of us? Either of four things happen with most of us. 4 events happen that gets us questioning about our life. For many people's, and I want to speak with compassion saying this, many people's life, there's a death in the family. And that jolts us so profoundly. We are like, wait a minute. What is the meaning of my life? What really brings me happiness? Could be a death in the family, or number 2, it can be a diagnosis. Something very profound. And I've noticed, in India, where I come from, the health boogeyman is heart disease. In the West, cancer is the biggest boogeyman. The day we get diagnosed, it changes our approach to life. We start asking, who am I? What is my life all about? What is true happiness? Why am I born? Diagnosis is a second event. A third event could be a loss of love, a divorce, separation, something unexpected. Wakes us up, makes us question our life. And the last of the 4 events that happens in most people's life that awakens them to return to bliss is a loss of identity. Say, for example, you have lived all your life as a business professional, and one day suddenly your work is no more, your job is no more, your business is no more, or you have been for 18, 19, 20 years, you have been a stay-at-home parent, and the next day you're suddenly an empty nester. Your children have left. A massive identity crisis hits. One of these 4 events happen in most people's lives that kicks off what we call their spiritual journey. a return to abundance. We start asking, what is the meaning of life? And what is amusing is the destination that we seek for the rest of our lives is actually our origin in our birth. That bliss, that expanded consciousness, that abundance that we were born as is what we strive to return to. We start a process of subtraction, deconditioning the self, letting, releasing the life lessons or the conditioning of our life experiences to return to be that child. That is pretty much, in a nutshell, the journey we go through. We are all born self-realized, and then we get conditioned. And then a moment of disruption happens that takes us back to these kids, to that inner child, to become one with that child spirit within. Now, why is this understanding important? In my culture, this is native. We recognize children are self-realized. Because understanding this informs how we educate our children. Many, when I started traveling when I was 22, through the West and across many other lands, I became aware that, the mainstream education modality is driven by an assumption that children are immature, are naive, are underdeveloped, are helpless, etc. If that becomes the premise of my mentality, then suddenly my education also starts to reflect that mentality. Oh, my son or my daughter, poor kid, helpless, useless, naive, underdeveloped, immature. And here I am, grown up, all wise, knowledgeable, smart, mature. And I have something to offer to these kids. And a lot of the conditioning and the limiting beliefs and assumptions and prejudices, etc., we start propagating. Many different religions have done that for generations and generations. Just basically from one generation to the other, propagating our own conditioning on kids. And Peter was talking about play. Play is one of the most divine attributes of our existence. And I'd love to bring this question over to the audience here. That is, if you have all the money on the planet, everything that you need for a whole lifetime, you have good health, and you have all the time that you need, etc. What would you choose to spend your time doing? And every time I ask this question, Abhay, play always features in the top 3. If not top 3, top 5, let's say. It's a very, very divine attribute of the self-realized. Now, play is just one of those divine attributes, but the child nature of Sat Chit Ananda, that infinite abundance, that is a subjective experience that we are born with. If I would say all of this, maybe some of you here in the audience might conclude, wait a minute, if that is how a child is, and if education's purpose has to include preserving that infinite abundance nature of a child, then wouldn't education be a harmful thing? And at the expense of sounding judgmental, Abel, I have to concur that most of education, as I've noticed in the East and the West, the mainstream education is actually more harmful than helpful. If I would put on a little bit my futurist hat, that's one of the hats that very often I seem to be labeled with in my travels, in my tours of events across the planet. Futurist, sitting with people who ask deep questions about the future of humanity. It's clear, and studies have actually shown this, not me, not from the mystics, not from the subjective side of the world. Very objective scientific research has shown that a child who is 4 years old today, who enters school, the current education curriculum system, will learn pretty much everything that will be useless by the time she is 18 years old and out of school. So imagine that, Abed. Pretty much everything that a little child would learn in the current curriculum is obsolete by the time she becomes an adult. What we call science. Yeah, there was a time when in India, cholesterol was a boogeyman, was the evil. From there, things have changed, now that's not any more relevant science. Now they used to talk about fat being evil, then carbohydrates being evil. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, today probably sugar is the greatest evil. Science, as we know, the objective, the materialist science, the Newtonian science is moving so fast that whatever it is that we pick up in school becomes irrelevant. My little son, who is 7 years old, is learning how to write with his hands. But guess what? You don't write anymore with your hands. Definitely when he becomes 18, he is not at all going to be writing anything. By the time he's an adult, as a futurist, I can tell you this, you can write things by not even having to speak the words out, and artificial intelligence will capture these words and turn them into script. No. When he's an adult, he would just need to think a thought. Just through thought, he can script whatever it is that needs to be written down. So forget about even having to speak out words in order to get script. So fingers will become useless to write. This is the speed at which Newtonian science, contemporary science, is moving. The result of which futurists say is that the contemporary education system is obsolete for the new generations. So what next? And the idea of abundance for me has been a very, very dear thought. As you know, Abel, as you mentioned, the pursuit of inner abundance or reclamation of inner abundance has been a very dear pursuit in my life. I've even written a book that has been extremely well received, a very tiny little book, actually, extremely well received in many different languages on many different lands across the globe around the laws of abundance. Now, abundance as a theme, if we don't try to break it down and try to more subjectively understand, I would just need to look at my kids, or I just need to look at any kids playing in the playground. And I see, wow, right now I am witnessing abundance in action. And that is a very gratifying experience for me, because in being that observer, that witness of that abundance at play, my spirit is yearning to become one with that abundance. And that's how kids are. So imagine what a miraculous experience it is to be a child. And then education happens, Abel. And we start getting conditioned. Fortunately, all the great speakers that you have lined up for this conference, this summit, Abel, they all have very valuable things to share in re-examining education. And where I come from, I remember, Satyana had some questions around Montessori and the Steiner traditions, etc. And because I'm a very curious person, I've actually studied all that stuff. And, I had to give them a lot of acknowledgement. The crux of what they have to share is very, very powerful at a theoretical level, very profound. In their own elegant language and philosophical wording, they have given us great reminders on the type of education system that is best preserved. Yet, practice is so different than theory. In my life, in the last nearly 3 decades, more than 25 years, I've been visiting schools, not so much to understand how the architecture of a school should be built, even in countries like Finland and Denmark, etc., where there is a great deal of attention on school architectures, the kind of form or configuration of schools that makes for great learning, great education. I'm less interested in the architecture of schools. I'm more interested in the curriculum. The moment you look at the curriculum, you can get a little sense of, whether this curriculum will preserve that infinite nature, that play nature, the abundance nature that we are born as. There is one other, for me, the most important element of a school to observe, to check, and that is the awareness level of the teachers. And I must say, Satyana and Abel, I don't want to sound judgmental saying this. I walk into the presence of a teacher by virtue of my daily spiritual practice or, decades of meeting teachers, being in their presence, watching them, perhaps. I've developed an intuition where in 60 to 90 seconds, I get an intuitive sense, call it my inner feminine, that speaks to me, says, wow, I can see the constrictions here in this teacher's awareness level. Or, wow, look at the aura of this teacher. She's radiant, she's expansive. She is the perfect space holder for kids to grow up while being in integrity to their inner child. That one factor, the awareness of the teacher, would really say it, that, forget about, the Minister of Education and the entire bureaucracy and the school administration and the curriculum and the way the school buildings are built, all of that aside, this one thing, the awareness of the space holder, the teacher. And teacher is a very generic word in the West. When we refer to teachers in India, there are actually 6 different classes or categories of teacher. But, I won't go there now, unless there is a question, if there's anybody interested. But just looking at the teacher.
I'm sorry to interrupt. There is a question. Kelly raised her hand a little while ago, and I think she has a question.
No.
No? Oh, okay.
Okay. All right. Please, in fact, I wouldn't mind being interrupted. If there are any questions that's coming up, we can always bring it into the idea of abundance creation in a holistic sense, as far as kids are concerned. I took the first few minutes, Abel and Satyana, to share a little bit of my understanding of children, born as the subjective experience of expanded consciousness and bliss. I took a few minutes to share a little bit about my observations around the mainstream education system, what I've noticed. And over the past couple of decades, I've realized, yes, we live in such a generous, abundant world, not just kids, even adults. Most of the adults that I meet are so limitlessly abundant and generous in nature. Nothing is actually preventing us from doing the otherwise unthinkable, and that is to offer an education that is truly recognizing the abundant nature of a child. And where I grew up, and I've been extremely fortunate to experience, the more holistic education, but also the non-holistic education. So I've been very fortunate to be on both sides of the education paradigm, if you want to call it that way. And if I look at the mainstream education systems in the East and the West, we've pretty much reached a stage where the mainstream education system caters only to the objective education of things. And that also comes from our increasingly rooted postmodern belief that all that exists here is all that there is. All that I can see or feel or sense through my 5 senses is all that there is. If you would take a moment to understand that, what it means is, if I can see it, it exists. If I can smell it, taste it, touch it, I hear it, it exists. If I cannot smell it or touch it, it doesn't exist. Try convincing a little kid that her little princess friend doesn't exist. Or, the heroes of my son who, wears a cape and goes out and fights crime and saves humanity doesn't exist. Or even Santa Claus or Easter bunnies don't exist. You can't convince them of that because they are able to experience what we call the supramental reality, a subjective reality that is very, very much present in our lives, that the more material scientists refuse to acknowledge. But hey, material scientists, unlike spiritual scientists, can't explain the idea of play or the motivation for play or the idea of joy or love or meaning or purpose or closeness or kindness, justice. They can't. But these are all experiences of the inner child, Abel. See how expansive a child's reality is, all because of that expansive consciousness. They can live in 4 different universes at the same time. So here we are right now, you and I, we are sharing one universe, one reality together. When we are in deep sleep or in big dreams, etc., we are in a different reality. Children operate in all these realities simultaneously. And this is not a spiritual scientist speaking. Even neuroscientists agree with that. So, if that is true, that there is a subjective reality and an objective reality, then confining your education only to the objective sciences is a disservice. It is basically a deliberate approach, a mindful, willful approach to disconnect a human from her inner child. So, holistic education, and this is the area where I have actually over the past couple of decades been holding space for many schools or education institutions in the East and the West, in rethinking their schools, their education. And it stems from the understanding that holistic education, and I really, Abel, don't like the word that is very renowned in the West. In the West, the mainstream label is alternate education. Have you heard of that, Abel? They call holistic education alternate education. That means there is something that is mainstream, there is something that is considered the original, and there is an alternate to that, which incidentally could be a Steiner school or a Montessori school or one of the other dozens of different variants, evolving variants of holistic schools. For me, the idea, Abel, of holistic education is, it is a mix of objective sciences and the subjective sciences. And I think Peter very briefly, at least in the last half of his talk, referred to morality as one of the things, the important things that education must cover. Okay. He touched upon play. Okay. Self-awareness. Okay. The capacity to move between different realities. Understanding that we are consciousness having a human experience. All of this is subjective education. The practice of kindness, generosity, or any of the other archetypal values is subjective education. If I look at the curriculum of mainstream education in the East and the West, Abel, none of this exists today. It's all gone. Firstly, it got hijacked by institutions or religious institutions, etc. Later, somehow, they became a waste of time. And this is probably a story from perhaps 150 years ago, when the industrial age, we entered the industrial age. We said, you know what? What is important is that a person should be able to cognitively function in a very conformist, repeatable manner with great consistency and repetitiveness. Once that became the mantra, Abel, it was very easy to simply focus on objective education, to the extent, I have to tell you this. You're really going to laugh when I tell you this. This was just before COVID. I went visiting one of the cities in India, and I was driving from the airport. I was being driven from the airport to the city where I was meant to offer some events. And while I was passing on the road, on the side of the road, I saw this big billboard, very big one. And this billboard was basically promoting a private school. In India, as you know, most schools in India are private schools simply because of the lack of government resources, naturally. And this school was proudly declaring on the billboard that our children undertake 12 hours of learning each day. And I was, wow. And they meant classroom learning, formal education, 12 hours of formal education each day. Because schools are catering to parents who are still in the scarcity mindset that our important responsibility for our children's education is somehow children should be, when they grow up, they should be able to keep their soul and body together. They should survive. They should self-preserve. And what is the surest way for these children to self-preserve? They go and learn all these objective sciences, do well in school, sit in class for 12 hours a day, sit in class, get the maximum of the objective sciences, hopefully get some good grades, and then somehow join some workplace somewhere where they will get a steady salary. That is their thinking. As long as the children can successfully keep their soul and body together, enough. So that kind of mainstream education that excessively focuses on the objective sciences, and I don't want to be, too judgmental or critical about the objective sciences. But simply focusing on the objective sciences is missing the point, simply because, like I earlier said, my little son and daughter, by the time they become adults, everything that they would learn from a mainstream school will be obsolete. In fact, I think as a futurist, I can tell you this. Dear friends of mine who are very, very eminent social thought leaders, they say that within the next 10 to 15 years, 60%, imagine this, 60% of all the current jobs will disappear. 60% of all the current jobs will disappear. And that throws most parents into panic. Wow, what happens to 60% of the jobs? Basically, most of the jobs will be taken over by machines, or they will go to the southernmost part of South America or Africa, etc. That's it. Which means, oh my goodness, my children will starve and die if they don't work. Because they're not going to work. They're not going to be able to work and earn a salary. But wait a minute. Who said the standard, Abir, that children have to, their education should be about preparing them to work? And that in order for you to have a living, you must work. Who set that standard? In India, where I come from, most parts of Africa and South America, many parts of Asia, no. Actually, majority of human population actually doesn't believe that. Doesn't believe the credo that in order for you to have a living, you must work. Yeah, that is a mantra of the industrial age that has informed our education system, modern education system. Wait a minute. I do not want my daughter and my son to go to school because one day they will learn some skill that will give them employment. No. The universe is abundant. I don't have to remind my kids of that. They remind me every day that the universe is abundant, that we are abundance, and we don't have to really spend 12, 16, 20 years of our life preparing ourselves to work for the next 40 years just to keep our soul and body together. But all of this has been the foundation piece of objective, science-based modern education system. Holistic education changes the thinking, Abel. Basically, here we are in holistic education. We start with the child in mind. When a child is born, the inner child and the being of the child are just one. It's non-dual. As we grow, there's a greater distance created between the inner child and our being. We become adults. In fact, we even give awards to people adult-like. And if somebody really be an adult is playful or joking or humorous or teasing each other, we say, oh, you're being childish. And that's like being critical, saying you're being childish, not as an applause or an acknowledgement. If somebody would tell me, hey, you're being childish, I would be like, oh, thanks for the compliment. But that's not how society is. We say that being adult means being disconnected from the inner child. In subjective education, we actually preserve the sanctity of that inner child, that childness, that inner divinity that's inside. Preserve it, nurture it. And alongside that, while continuing to nurture the subjective self, we will also, in fact, Peter was alluding to this in his talk, children are natural learners. If the first law of parenting, conscious parenting, Abel, is keep out of the way of a child. This is the first law of conscious parenting, where I come from. Keep out of the way of a child. And I see my little son, how he's learning. He can read these days. He's 7 years old. He can read. Guess what? Nobody taught him how to read. He just picked up. And not because my son is extraordinary. No. Every child is extraordinary. In fact, we all are extraordinary, just slightly out of touch with that extraordinariness inside. This is important because we need to shift our thinking with respect to what a child is. And if anybody in the audience is convinced that this is how we should be looking at a child as a reflection of the divine, as a fully self-realized being, then even if the education is free, which is interestingly a phenomenon in Europe, education is free. For me, coming from India, in the rural areas, of course, we would the whole village, educates the kids. Other than that, just growing up every other part of the world, whether it is the United States or whatever, in Canada, yes, to a large extent. Otherwise, Europe, education is free, which is very, very noble, especially countries like Germany, where I have great admiration that by even holistic education can be offered for free if they would fulfill the requirements of the ministry, which I think is extremely noble for the renaissance of holistic education. And why is that holistic education important? Because we already with COVID, we have entered what futurists called the VUCA world. I don't know, Abel, have you ever heard the term VUCA?
No.
VUCA, VUCA. You can Google that, you will find that. V for volatile, U for uncertain, C for complex, A for ambiguous. Already with COVID, we entered the VUCA world, a very volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. In a decade's time, 60% of the jobs, as we know, will cease to exist. We are increasingly, as humanity, deconstructing, digitizing, becoming non-binary, becoming mixed racial. Boundaries around the world are breaking down. And the renaissance of millennials and Gen Z, the younger generations of people, is completely different. They are not interested in taking education forward just because they can get an assured job. What works there is our capacity to exercise our holistic nature, not because we have to work to make a living. I can tell you this, Abel, you're in France, and France has had a great history of many renaissances, which I'm trusting can help the rest of the world with the next renaissance. Abel, we are very soon, if we want to have a harmonious